Welcome, my bountiful friends. Start up your engines, check the fuel levels and chocks away. But watch out for the ack bursts, because today we're going to be delving deep into Joseph Heller's anti-war classic, Catch-22. This book is centered on one man's war and his quest to extricate himself from a bad situation which could prove fatal at any moment. At every turn he is thwarted by an illogical and indifferent military regime, and he witnesses firsthand the brutality and insanity of war. Today I'll be diving deep into Catch-22 and we'll be looking at its history and development, its star, its impact on literature and culture. Brace for spoilers, they will be filling the skies like flak, so turn away now if you've not read this book. Joseph Heller began writing Catch-22 in 1953, roughly 8 years after the end of World War II. He was inspired by his own experience as a US Army Air Force bombardier during the war. The idea for the novel first came to him that year while he was working in advertising, and he drafted the opening lines that would eventually evolve into the first chapter. Heller initially titled the work Catch-18, and the first chapter was published as a standalone story in New World Writing in 1955. He spent several years developing the novel, working on it in his spare time while holding down various jobs. His approach to writing was non-linear. He worked on different sections separately rather than progressing through the story in order. By 1957 he had written about 100 pages, and by 59 he had a full manuscript. Throughout this process he continued refining the novel's satirical tone, deepening its critique of war, bureaucracy and the illogical structures of power. The novel's fragmented structure, non-linear timeline and dark humour were all carefully shaped during this period. The title change from Catch-18 to Catch-22 occurred later in the publishing process. This was because another novel, Mila 18 by Leon Uris, was being published around the same time, and Heller's publisher, Simon & Schuster, wanted to avoid confusion. The number 22 was chosen arbitrarily, but became iconic, capturing the essence of the paradoxical military regulation at the heart of the novel. With the title finally settled, the book finally saw publication in 1961. Captain John Yossarian is the protagonist. He's a US Army Air Force bombardier stationed on Pianosa, an airbase in Italy during World War II. He is obsessed with avoiding death and trying to escape the war. He's tall, dark-haired, and of Iranian heritage. His paranoia grows throughout the novel, leading to erratic behaviour. Cynical, rebellious and desperate to find loopholes in the war system mark his character. Colonel Cathcart can be seen in many ways as the antagonist of the novel. He is the ambitious commander of Yossarian's squadron, and he's constantly increasing the number of required combat missions to impress his superiors. He's middle-aged, neatly groomed, with a commanding presence. He's arrogant, insecure, and obsessed with being promoted to general at the cost of all his subordinates. Major is a squadron commander who has been deliberately promoted to his current rank due to the vagaries of life, principally by his father, who named him Major, and then the military authorities who have decided to continue the joke for their own amusement by appointing him up to and no further than the rank of Major. This unfortunately named individual is tall, lanky, and with an awkward demeanour. He's socially awkward too, unable to rise above the cosmic joke that is his life. He is completely passive, spending the majority of his time trying to avoid further personal mishaps while hiding in his office. Doc Danica is the squadron's physician. who is more concerned with his own well-being than helping the soldiers of his unit. He's small wiring and often looks worried. He is self-pitying and bitter about being forced to serve in the war, despite not having to participate in combat missions himself. He could be a source of support or salvation for the airmen, but he is blind to their predicament as he is fixated only on his own welfare. Milo Minderbinder is the squadron's mess officer who turns war into a massive black market enterprise. He's slick, clean-cut and businessman-like. He's opportunistic, a devout capitalist, and prioritises profit over morality. Lieutenant Sheiskov is a training officer obsessed with military parades. He has a rigid posture and a military-obsessed demeanour. He is humorless and is obsessed with meaningless efficiency. He later becomes a general, which highlights the lunacy of the hierarchy and the system. Chaplain Tapman is the group's chaplain who struggles with his faith and the absurdity of war. He's thin, frail, and often nervous-looking. He is kind, introspective, increasingly disillusioned with the military system, and largely ineffective in the lives of the men. Orr is Yossarian's eccentric tent mate, who constantly crashes planes, but secretly plans his escape. He's small, with an impish and determined look. He is resourceful, underestimated, and secretly brilliant. Yossarian's squadron is commanded by Colonel Cathcart, an ambitious officer who continually raises the number of required combat missions to impress his superiors, making it impossible for the soldiers to complete their service and be sent home. This act also inevitably and steadily raises the probability of each airman dying in their next subsequent combat mission. The soldiers in the squadron, each characterised by unique eccentricities, struggle to navigate the absurdities of military life and the proximity of death. Throughout the novel, Yossarian witnesses numerous tragedies that deepen his sense of disillusionment. His friend Nately dies in combat, and the innocent Italian girl he loved is left to an uncertain fate. The young naive airman Snowden is fatally wounded during a mission, and his death, revealed in a fragmented non-linear fashion, haunts Yossarian, symbolising the brutal, meaningless nature of war. As Yossarian grows increasingly desperate, he begins openly resisting military authority. He walks around naked in protest after a friend's death, refusing to fly missions, and even fakes illness to stay in the hospital. Eventually, he deserts his post and flees to Rome, where he sees firsthand the suffering of the war's victims. The military attempts to manipulate him into compliance, offering to send him home if he endorses their system. He refuses, recognising the deep corruption and moral bankruptcy of the institution. In the final moments of the novel, Yossarian learns that his friend Orr, who was believed to be dead, had successfully escaped to neutral Sweden. Inspired by this act of defiance, Yossarian makes a bold decision. He too will flee the war, following in Orr's path to Sweden, rather than continue participating in a system that treats human life as expendable. The book deploys a distinctive narrative style and atmosphere to underscore the absurdities of war and bureaucracy. The novel's non-linear structure presents events from multiple perspectives, often revisiting incidents with new context, which can transform a previously humorous situation into a tragic one. This messy, haphazard structure also reflects the chaotic and unpredictable nature of war itself. One moment everything can be fine and funny, and in the next someone is suddenly and brutally killed. Heller's prose is characterised by circular reasoning and repetitive dialogue, mirroring the illogical regulations that trap the characters. The titular Catch-22 exemplifies this, as it dictates that airmen can be grounded if they're insane, but requesting to be grounded is considered proof of sanity, thus disqualifying them. This paradox creates a sense of inescapable frustration and highlights the irrationality of the military system. The atmosphere of the novel constantly oscillates between dark humour and horror, unbalancing the mood and security of the reader. Heller masterfully blends slapstick comedy with grim depictions of war's brutality, emphasising the thin line between the two. This juxtaposition serves to critique the dehumanising effects of war and the indifference of those in power. The novel very obviously is centred on the absurdity of war. War is the cessation of the normal order of things. It operates under its own structures, laws and traditions. It is chaotic by nature, which means that anyone, anywhere and on any side can potentially become its victim, and nothing can or will be done after the fact. The novel spends little time focusing on the actions of the enemy, or even interactions with the enemy. Instead, it is primarily focused on a solitary individual who, having initially had honourable intentions and a sense of duty towards his part in the combat, has come to realise that the reality of war is nothing like what he expected, and that he is now trapped, his own death being virtually demanded by the system to satisfy the process. The orders he receives often don't make sense or are counterproductive to the central effort. They often don't even consider the safety of the individuals who have to carry them out. In fact, there's often a callous disregard for their lives. It's as if their demise in operations is a matter of course, and therefore of little consequence. Through this lens, we can then say that the novel also has the theme of the struggle of individual survival and sanity against the immovable, implacable titan forces of change. The majority of the chapters are named after the characters Yossarian interacts with. Quite often they have names that portray the aspect of the character that they represent, and I believe what Heller is showing us here are the different attitudes of the people he actually served with during the war. Each attitude is in the face of the same stimulus, but the approach and tactics of each individual varies greatly. 3 good examples of this are Scheisskopf, Minderbinder and Orr. Lieutenant Scheisskopf's name literally means shithead in German, and this is direct correlation to this character's obsession with matters of trivial military procedure, such as having parades in the middle of a combat zone. Then we have Milo Minderbinder. His name is suspiciously close to that of Mindbender, which would suggest that by utilising his special ability to change his own and others' views of the war, he is then able to exploit the situation to his own personal advantage, transmuting the horrors of conflict into a succession of business opportunities to advance his own business enterprise. Or, who successfully manages to flee abroad from the war, well, his name may either be derived by the French word for gold, or else the Hebrew word for light. It makes little difference which it is, because either is effectively the same, in that the character and his actions are either a golden path or a light that shows Yossarian the way to his salvation. The dehumanising power of bureaucracy is also another core theme. Heller illustrates how impersonal bureaucratic systems strip individuals of their autonomy and humanity. Characters are ensnared in convoluted regulations and red tape, rendering them powerless, or, in the case of those servicemen not flying the combat missions, it turns them into automatons who will see their comrades dead for fear of infringing arbitrary and nonsensical rules. For instance, the ever-increasing mission quota set by Colonel Cathcart prevents soldiers from completing their service, trapping them in an endless cycle of peril, which is evident to all, and yet Dr. Denneker still rigidly applies the system's extremely narrow rules on what constitutes ill health, instead of showing compassion and mercy and permitting the escape of men like Yossarian from the war zone and near certain death. The corrupting influence of the individual is another theme. Whether it be Cathcart's raising of the number of combat missions, or Doc Danika's sense of self-preservation and avoidance of personal responsibility, or Minderbinder's rampant misuse of stores and facilities in pursuit of his own business venture, Heller shows how personal profit motives can corrupt the purpose and pursuit of even the noblest of causes. The prioritisation of personal gain over human life exemplifies a moral decay that has always been inherent in human nature and is further exacerbated with the military-industrial complex. By weaving these themes together, Catch-22 offers a scathing critique of the structures that perpetuate war and dehumanise individuals, challenging readers to reflect on the moral complexities of conflict and authority. Catch-22 was first published in 1962. Early reviews were mixed. Some critics found its structure chaotic, while others appreciated its biting satire. The novel initially sold modestly but gained traction, particularly among college students and countercultural movements of the 1960s. As the Vietnam War escalated, the novel's themes of bureaucratic absurdity, power abuse, and the senselessness of war resonated with a growing audience. By the late 1960s, Catch-22 had become a major commercial and critical success. The novel's impact has only grown over time, and it is now regarded as one of the greatest satirical novels of the 20th century. It introduced the term Catch-22 into popular language, symbolising a no-win situation dictated by illogical rules. The novel has been adapted for film and TV several times. Heller later wrote a sequel called Closing Time in 1994, which revisits Yossarian in old age, but it never achieved the same cultural impact as the original novel. War novels bearing an anti-war narrative are nothing new. After World War I, there was a surge of books such as All Quiet on the Western Front, A Farewell to Arms, and Goodbye to All That, to name but a few. After the Second World War, there was another such surge, and the likes of The Naked and the Dead, The Young Lions, both of which were published as soon as 1948, and 1951's From Here to Eternity typified such novels. Just about all of these books tackle the theme of the brutality, chaos and pointlessness of war. But for me, none of them capture the feeling of being trapped within a colossal bureaucratic machine that's indifferent to the men who are its moving parts, as Catch-22 is. This particular novel differs in its telling in a number of key points. Firstly, while Yossarian is a de facto hero, he has after all flown his set number of combat missions. By the time we get to him, he is simply shown to be a man driven to the end of his tether, who is trying all that he can to escape from the war. This makes him quite the unique protagonist. Catch-22 is a novel set in World War II, yet it does not waste any time explaining that particular conflict, its causes or its progression. Instead, it spends its time focusing on the broader themes of bureaucracy, individual survival, and the insanity of institutional systems. Its lessons can be applied to most wars, especially those of the modern era. The novel is a warning to those that hold nationalistic or idealistic ideas about warfare. It tells you that you may join a war for all the best reasons, but you cannot expect the military machine to respect or honour any of these reasons. The objectives and rationale of the military machine may even be at complete odds to the stated purpose of the war. It could be the actions of a soldier's own side, or the processes of the machine, or even the corrupt aims of superiors or peers that may result in their death, and not the actions of the enemy. There is no glamour, no liberated territory, no jubilant crowds, no medals and no victories. in the books, save Yserian's personal one in Catch-22. In the end, there is just one man's seemingly endless quest to extricate himself from the mess he has found himself in, and he finally liberates himself by fleeing the war. So, what are your thoughts on this World War II classic? Which of the absurd characters did you find the most interesting, and which bits of dialogue did you find the most profound? Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into the world of literature. Until next time, keep reading, and remember, if you're ever in doubt about your personal safety in any given situation, just ditch everyone and get going to Sweden. Hej då.